A single fluorescent light buzzes above a concrete floor. Somewhere in a nondescript military facility, two soldiers face each other. No rifles, no body armor, just rattan sticks, and a fighting system older than the country they serve. Welcome back to Echoes of Ancients. This is Part 3. If you've been following this series, you already know we've peeled back layers, we've explored the roots of Filipino martial arts, we've traced how these skills traveled across oceans. Now we go deeper, into the producer's chair, so to speak, behind the curtain of military training programs, into the logistics, the procurement nightmares, the bureaucratic battles that had to be won before a single stick could be swung inside a Department of Defense facility. Because here's what most people miss. Getting ancient knowledge into a modern military isn't a romantic story. It's a paperwork story, a budget story, a story of convincing skeptical generals that bamboo and rattan belong alongside rifles and drones. Let's start with a specific case, Fort Benning, Georgia, renamed Fort Moore in 2023. This installation has housed some of the most elite combat training programs the U.S. Army has ever run. The Modern Army Combatives Program, MACP, launched here in 2002 under Matt Larson, a career soldier with a deep obsession, building a hand-to-hand combat system that could save lives. Larson didn't start with Filipino martial arts. He started with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, grappling. Ground fighting. The logic was simple. Most real combative encounters between soldiers and adversaries ended up on the ground. But there was a gap, a massive, dangerous gap. What about weapons? Not firearms, improvised weapons, sticks, knives, tools grabbed in desperation during close quarters combat when a rifle jams, when ammo runs dry, when the fight collapses into an arm's-length struggle. Larson and his team needed a weapons-based fighting framework, and they needed one that was battle-tested, not theoretical, not sport-derived, not choreographed for a movie set. They looked at European fencing traditions, too formal. Kendo and Japanese sword arts came under review, elegant but designed around a specific weapon that soldiers wouldn't carry. Then someone in the program pointed toward the Philippines, toward Kali, Arnis, Eskrima. The beauty of Filipino martial arts, from a military logistics perspective, was staggering. The weapon could be anything: a stick, a rolled-up magazine, a pen, a collapsed antenna. The system didn't depend on a single specialized tool. It depended on angles, geometry, timing. The weapon was interchangeable. The principles stayed constant. Think about that from a procurement officer's standpoint. You don't need to requisition expensive specialty gear. You need rattan sticks that cost a few dollars each and a qualified instructor. The cost-to-effectiveness ratio was unlike anything else on the table. But getting approval wasn't simple. Military training doctrine changes at the speed of bureaucracy, which is glacial. Every new element in a combatives program requires documentation, injury risk assessment, liability review, instructor certification pipelines, and integration with existing curricula. Larson's team had to prove that Filipino martial arts techniques could be taught quickly to soldiers with zero prior experience and produce measurable improvement in close combat readiness. They ran pilot programs, they tracked injury rates, they compared performance metrics between soldiers who trained with weapon-based Filipino methods and those who didn't. The results spoke clearly enough to survive the committee process. Filipino martial arts entered the MACP framework, not as a standalone discipline, but woven into the fabric of the combatives curriculum. Stick drills, knife defense patterns, the concept of defanging the snake, striking the attacking limb rather than the body behind it. These ideas, refined across 1,000 years of island warfare, became part of how American soldiers learned to fight. And here's where the story takes a turn most people don't expect. The Philippine connection didn't just influence the Army, it rippled outward into agencies and units that don't publish their training manuals. Special operations communities, naval special warfare, specific units within Joint Special Operations Command began integrating Filipino martial arts concepts more aggressively. The reasons were practical, not romantic. Operators deployed to environments where carrying a firearm wasn't always possible. Embassy settings, undercover roles, protective details in civilian clothes. They needed empty hand and improvised weapon skills that could scale from gentle control to lethal force in a heartbeat. Several well-known Filipino martial arts practitioners and instructors have been brought in as consultants for these programs over the decades. Dan Inosanto, Bruce Lee's training partner and a legendary figure in martial arts, helped bridge the gap between traditional Filipino fighting systems and modern combative applications. His influence extended far beyond any single branch. Stop for a moment. Consider the sheer logistical absurdity. The world's most technologically advanced military, with stealth bombers, satellite networks, AI-driven targeting systems, sends its elite operators to learn fighting techniques passed down through oral tradition in Filipino villages. Techniques that predate gunpowder in Southeast Asia. You know, techniques that survived 300 years of Spanish colonial suppression, decades of American occupation, and the brutality of Japanese invasion during World War II. That survival is the second case worth examining. During the Spanish colonial period, over 3 centuries, the practice of indigenous fighting arts was suppressed, banned in many accounts. The Spanish authorities understood something fundamental. A population that retains its martial knowledge retains its capacity for rebellion. So Arnis went underground. It disguised itself inside folk dances like sinulog and similar cultural performances. Movements that looked like celebration were, underneath, combat drills preserved in rhythm and muscle memory. This is a production story too, just a much older one. The producers were community elders, village leaders, practitioners who made deliberate decisions about how to package and protect their knowledge. They encoded warfare inside art. They turned lethal technique into dance so the colonizers would applaud instead of arrest. Generations of Filipinos carried this knowledge forward without formal institutions, without government funding, without academies. They did it through family lineages, master-to-student transmission, backyard training sessions that looked, to the uninitiated, like old men playing with sticks. Now bridge those two cases together. A 1,000-year-old fighting art, preserved through colonial suppression by disguising itself as dance, resurfaces in the 20th century and ends up inside the training doctrine of the most powerful military on Earth. The logistics of preservation across a millennium are almost incomprehensible. No central archive, no governing body for most of that history. No standardized curriculum until relatively recent decades, just people, families. Communities choosing, generation after generation, to keep the art alive. That choice matters. It matters because it tells us something profound about what military planners recognize when they evaluate combat systems. They're not choosing Kali because it looks exotic or because someone in procurement has Filipino heritage. They're choosing it because the art proved itself through the harshest testing environment imaginable. Centuries of existential threat. Any system that can survive active suppression by a colonial empire, adapt to new weapons and contexts across generations, and still produce effective fighters has passed a validation process no modern laboratory could replicate. Here's the detail that makes this even more compelling. The U.S. military's relationship with Filipino martial arts isn't new. You know, it stretches back to the Philippine-American War at the turn of the 20th century. American soldiers encountered Filipino guerrilla fighters, Moro warriors in particular, who wielded bladed weapons with devastating effectiveness. The .38 caliber revolver carried by American troops at the time often failed to stop a charging warrior armed with a bolo or kris. This direct battlefield experience led the U.S. military to adopt the .45 caliber pistol, the legendary M1911, specifically because they needed greater stopping power against opponents whose close combat skills were extraordinary. Moving on. The American military learned from Filipino fighters by getting beaten by them first. That lesson echoed across a century, and the willingness to learn from it, rather than dismiss it, reveals something about institutional memory inside military organizations. Somewhere in the chain of command, across decades, individuals kept pointing back to the Philippines, kept saying, "These people figured something out about close combat that we haven't matched." Let me ground this in a specific, tangible image. Picture a modern combatives instructor at a U.S. military installation. Early morning, a class of 20 soldiers standing in a gymnasium. Each one holds a rattan stick, harvested, dried, and shaped, using methods that Filipino craftsmen have refined for generations. The instructor demonstrates an angle 1 strike, a diagonal downward slash. The soldiers mirror it, then angle 2, then the checking hand, then the counter. These angles, typically 12 in most systems, form a geometry of combat that maps onto virtually any handheld weapon or empty hand strike. Learn the 12 angles with a stick, and you can apply them with a knife, a collapsible baton, a helmet, or bare fists. The Filipino masters who developed this framework understood modularity before anyone used that word in a military context. Now, multiply that image. Across installations, across branches, across allied nations that have adopted similar combatives approaches, Australia, the United Kingdom, Canada, and others. The ripple effect of Filipino martial arts inside global military training is enormous, yet it's rarely discussed in mainstream coverage. Why the silence? Not conspiracy, not some classified directive to keep it hidden. The answer is more mundane and more interesting. Military combatives training doesn't generate dramatic headlines. It doesn't cost billions. It doesn't involve flashy technology. Budget committees don't hold hearings about rattan stick procurement. Defense journalists chase fighter jet contracts and missile defense systems, not hand-to-hand combat syllabi. So Filipino martial arts influence sits in plain sight, unnoticed by most, hidden by its own modesty. A 1,000-year-old system doing its work quietly inside the machinery of the world's largest military, exactly the way it survived colonialism, by being underestimated. There's a lesson in that for anyone building something meaningful. Don't wait for recognition. Don't build for applause. Build for effectiveness. Build for survival. The Filipino martial arts masters who encoded their knowledge into dance weren't seeking credit. They were ensuring continuity, and their strategic patience paid off across centuries. If this series has moved you, if you've felt that spark of recognition, that pride in ancestral ingenuity, then carry it forward. Share this story. Not because a narrator asked you to, but because this history deserves to be known by every Filipino, by every martial artist, by every person who respects the collision of ancient wisdom and modern necessity. Subscribe to Echoes of Ancients because this story isn't finished. Part 4 will go somewhere none of us expected, into a chapter that connects these fighting arts to maritime trade routes and pre-colonial geopolitics in ways that rewrite assumptions. But that connection hinges on a single archaeological discovery, and to understand its significance, you'll need what we've built together across these first 3 parts. Remember that image from the beginning: a bare concrete floor, 2 soldiers, fluorescent light, rattan sticks, no billion-dollar technology, no satellite uplink, no augmented reality, heads-up display, just 2 human beings applying principles that Filipino warriors refined a millennium ago. Principles so effective that the most advanced military on the planet still reaches for them when the distance closes, when the gadgets fail, when combat becomes primal. 1,000 years of knowledge, disguised as dance, reborn as doctrine, still underestimated, still unbroken. That fluorescent light keeps buzzing, the sticks keep cracking, and the ancient art keeps doing what it has always done, surviving by being exactly what the moment demands.